Hello there. It's a difficult time at the moment. The spring is not quite coming through. Feels like we're waiting for it. It's cold and clammy, but quiet. I've been working a lot with the masks, as ever, trying to encourage them to dissolve fully back down into the second story, which is where I feel all the magic, power and truth is for human beings. I think it was Nicole perhaps who said that life is one event after another. But the problem for us all, brothers and sisters on this planet, is that the events are not received. Gurdjieff, like many people, worried closely about the action that he took. But on the other side, on the passive side, every action, every interaction has results that need to be received, and they are not received. Human beings act, but they do not receive, they do not feel, they are not present enough. That is a problem, because if you receive the results of your action, then the circle is complete and you have participated, and then you grow from that, and that is life. That is how life should be. It is like one whole conscious breath. The breath begins almost imperceptibly. The gate opens and the thread is taken and runs. And then it widens, the breath widens, and then starts to narrow as it reaches the top gate. Very subtly it falls off the peak and runs back down, and to follow the thread all the way down through the exhalation until it begins to run out and runs out and runs out into the bottom gate. And that is the breath. But every action in every plane should be the same. But human beings are full of excitement. They're like a young species, like America. They rush into things and they don't pick up the pieces. It is as if, not that they are third force blind, but they are blind to the passive, to the hidden earth, to the underbelly. They see only above. They see only when the light is on. When the light is off, they do not see. And so they cannot complete the cycle. Not yet, anyway. I'm going to talk a little bit about Gurdjieff's famous car crash. Noel talked about it this week. And I've got the record from Olga de Hartmann here. She says, Tuesday the 8th of July, 1924. That morning, instead of going to the Café de la Paix, I went to the new apartment I had found for him on the Boulevard Perrière. Mr. Gurdjieff had planned to go outside the city to look at a quantity of equipment I was preparing to buy for the Priory, to my astonishment, he was not ready. And when I reminded him that we had to start immediately, he said, "Oh, telephone that we'll come tomorrow." This surprised me even more, knowing how considerate and gentle Mr. Gurdjieff was when it concerned people outside the work, though certainly not with us. I told him the store manager would be very annoyed, but he was quite firm and told me to phone him that we would come tomorrow. Then Mr. Gurdjieff said to write at once to my parents in Leningrad, telling them to sell everything of ours and theirs and come to the Priory, because soon there would be a serious famine. Later he and I went to his garage and he asked me to tell the mechanic to check his Citroën thoroughly, especially the steering wheel. He told me he would be having lunch at an Armenian restaurant to do some personal business, after which he would take the car and drive directly to the Priory. I was to return to his new apartment to make an inventory and then take the train back to the Priory alone. I was again astonished and of course disappointed, because Mr. Gurdjieff always took me back in the car. Well, that's all I'm going to read from Olga de Hartmann. The things that seem clear to me is that Gurdjieff had received a premonition of various things, not just of the car crash, but also of a famine in Leningrad. And de Hartmann had some family over there, and Gurdjieff told her to tell her family to leave Leningrad. He must have received a series of premonitions together. He could have perhaps opened a celestial window in his mind, or perhaps he was doing a kind of practice which brings him close to that window, or I'm just conjecturing here, he could have been speaking to someone from a higher world. I don't know. He was certainly capable of doing anything like that. But anyway, yes, it seems like he received various types of information about the future. And he protected de Hartmann by sending it back in the train. He tried to protect the car by having it checked by a mechanic. And then he decided to go ahead with it anyway. Why, I don't know. Perhaps he thought he could outrun fate. Perhaps he wanted to try and see, to test himself. Am I capable of defeating fate this time? How can fate catch up with me if I'm so aware? Well, maybe the answer to that, and it is said a lot in the East. It is said a lot that famous masters died, sometimes painfully, sometimes violently, because they were paying off their karma. And that karma is part of a very large wheel, and that our lives here are smaller than we think. And everything has to be paid. So don't worry too much. There was something else I read in one book by Jean Toomer, or about Jean Toomer, and it was about another car accident, just to show that, Gurdjieff wasn't infallible or impregnable. And it goes like this. A more likely story was told me by my stepfather, Philip Lassalle, who was in Gurdjieff's car on August the 9th, 1948, when a truck crashed into it on the road south of Paris, near Montargis. Gurdjieff was pinned in the wreck by the steering column. Philip was thrown clear and tried, though injured himself, to pull Gurdjieff clear. Gurdjieff told him to stop making his pain worse and sit down and listen. Then, until help arrived over an hour later, he told stories. Some people, so it would seem, I don't really know, I'm not part of any inner circle of Gurdjieff's. I'm not part of any work groups. But some people are concerned that, having a crash makes you infallible. I can tell you that my teacher was able to transmit directly into my mind awakened states, and to teach me very skillfully, for which I was shocked, surprised. I mean, to be honest with you, I'd been to so many different ashrams and schools that I was just grateful to not have to leave, to find somebody who knew what he was doing, So I had quite a strange response to my teacher's demonstration of his sincerity and his straightforward ability, which was I just sat down. I guess I was tired of so many charlatans that you see and meet. But my teacher, yes, although he was greatly skilled, remains very greatly skilled, did have disasters. Some of his students turned on him one day, and it was pretty horrific to see. Bad things happen on the earth, human beings, it's not just human beings. I was watching some seagulls today. They were frolicking about, fighting, they're flying along, crapping all over the street. Huge streaks of white material falling from them as they fly about. I'm not criticizing the seagulls. It's just that, the nature of this whole world is very mixed. It's a very bloody place. It's like the Menzies. Whatever you may think about yourself, when the Menzies come and there's blood everywhere and pain, you're feeling the womb of the earth, and that's the kind of place we live in. It's a kind of I guess it's fertile, but it also is a watering hole of many different types of creatures, and there is not very much order here. And so in such a place it's hard to imagine that even very highly realized and extremely sincere people, teachers, will live without conflict and confrontation and stupidity, large and small. Of course, that's what they meet. And there's something else, which is that because the West has been de-spiritualized for hundreds of years, people in the West have a lot of imagination about what the path is really about. For instance, if I think of the Christian evangelists I see in the West today, they talk about faith and belief, and there's a huge chasm between the secular world and this light that they're trying to put on, and there is no path between these two very distant shores. But if you go into the Catholic practice, and also in the Orthodox practice, they have a path, they have the steps, they have the octave, all those things that they do, you know, kneeling, praying, giving to the poor, good works, confession, reading scriptures, and certainly the Mass. The Mass is a kind of ceremony which shows a huge amount of knowledge, because it brings down higher forces into the earth, into the body and blood, and it's given to the flock, and they consume it, and those higher forces, and yes, I mean this literally, go inside of you. Yes, it happens. And it is so designed that even totally idiot priests can act as a server for this rite. Yes, they can. They can be deaf, dumb, and blind, and it will still work. So clearly the people who put that together had very deep knowledge of the alchemy of the mortal world, whereas in the East, particularly in India, they have knowledge of the higher world, of the mental plane, which is all those spiritual states. But not many people have got knowledge of this mortal world. Knowledge here is difficult to gain. And with that, I am going to read something from Gurdjieff. The first part, this is all from Beelzebub's Tales. The first part is Gurdjieff talking about his decision to close the institute, which he had taken after that terrible car crash. Gurdjieff says this: "It was with an impulse of inexpressible grief and despondency that I was constrained to make the decision to liquidate this institute, and also everything organized and carefully prepared for the opening the following year of 18 branches in different countries. In short, to abandon everything I had previously created with almost superhuman labor, chiefly because about 3 months after the aforementioned accident, when the functioning of my usual mentation had been more or less re-established, although my body was still quite powerless, I realized that the attempt to preserve the existence of this institute in the absence of real people around me, and the impossibility of procuring without my help the enormous material means required, would inevitably lead to a catastrophe that would result for me in my old age, as well as for many others wholly dependent on me, in a condition of half-starved vegetation." What's interesting for me here is that he says that in the absence of real people around me. This means that the people around him had not reached the level that he had hoped for them. And I think in the same way as I described modern Western priests as clinging on to some sort of distant light with no bridge, the students of Gurdjieff should recognize that it is a practical matter, and that you must do the physical, emotional, intellectual work and develop yourself. You must develop yourself. You must develop yourself as you get older. You must be more powerful tomorrow than you are today. That's how his path works. But I'm sure many of his students simply like to be in Paris in the summer with interesting people. Although I would personally criticize Gurdjieff by saying that he's trying too hard to be different here, and he should have organized work to make products that could be sold, so that there would be some sort of product. However, I think he does answer that point later on, and I'm going to read further on from some lectures he attached to the end of his book, which begin like this. The fundamental evil among contemporary people is that, owing to the rooted and widespread abnormal methods of education of the rising generation, this fourth personality, which should be present in everybody on reaching responsible age, is entirely lacking in them, and almost all of them consist only of 3 of the enumerated parts, which moreover are formed arbitrarily of themselves and anyhow. What are the 4 personalities? They are the personality of the physical body, the emotional, the mental, and finally the 4th is the constellation of the 3 into 1 identity, which should be the man himself. So there should be 4 parts. The 3 itemized parts, and then the 4th, which is the resolution of the 3 together. And Gurdjieff says that the 4th is missing, and not only that, but the 3 are in poor condition. Which, practically speaking, means that during Western education, people do not learn how to feel their own feelings, nor do they learn to think their own thoughts. Nobody sitting with them to help them develop. It's not a question about being free to have your own thoughts. Somebody actually has to sit with you and connect you to the chain of knowledge of your people, so that your mind receives something from the minds of your ancestors, like a river. And so your intellect is able to flower in their river, and likewise the learning of the body, and so on. There's a section at the end of Beelzebub's Tales. It's called The Edition. It's part of a lecture. It says this: such is the ordinary average man, an unconscious slave, entirely at the service of all universal purposes, alien to his personal individuality. He may live through all his years as he is, and as such be destroyed forever. However, great nature has given him the possibility of not being merely a blind tool entirely at the service of these all-universal objective purposes, but while serving her and actualizing what is foreordained for him, which is the lot of every breathing creature, of working at the same time for himself, for his own egoistic individuality. This possibility also was given him for serving the common purpose, since, for the equilibrium of these objective laws, such relatively liberated people are necessary. Although this liberation is possible, nevertheless, whether any particular man has a chance to attain it, this is difficult to say. There are a great many reasons which may not permit it, and which in most cases depend neither upon us personally nor upon great cosmic laws, but only upon the various accidental conditions of our arising and formation, that is to say, chiefly upon heredity and the various circumstances during the process of our preparatory age. It is just these uncontrollable conditions which may not permit this liberation. This is the section I was talking about earlier. Gurdjieff says, the chief difficulty in the way of liberation from complete slavery is that we must, with an intention coming from our own initiative and a persistence sustained by our own efforts, that is to say, not by another man's will, but by our own, succeed in eradicating from our presence both the already fixed consequences of certain properties of that something in our forefathers called the organ Kundabuffer, as well as the predisposition to those consequences which may again arise. Yeah. An intention coming from our own initiative in a persistence sustained by our own efforts. That is the key thing. That is what makes a man. That it is your own intention, your own initiative, your own will, that you choose to do something, to be something, to learn something. And you choose again. And that's a difficult journey. But by the end of that, you develop a taste for being me, and you're no longer part of the flock who is always they. But much as it is very good for you to read Beelzebub's tales, as long as you understand it to deliver to you real cosmic truths, no matter that the setting may be a bit silly, the material of it is true. If you read it like that, you can greatly benefit, but you must stand up and use your body and heart and your mind, and you must grow, because you cannot fulfill Gurdjieff's requirements of you if you are the same next year as you are today. You must develop ability, real ability with your hands, the ability to make something, the ability to feel things, to hear music that you didn't, to see colors that you didn't, to widen the sphere of your intellectual ability. You must become a bigger person. It is not a book club. The reason why I picked up Toomer's book is because he had said, I think it is a he, he had said that after working with Gurdjieff, he felt in the best physical condition of his life, and he wanted never to change. He wanted to live like that always, because when your body is strong and able, you feel meaning flow through you, because you create meaning. And when your body is strong and healthy, then so will your feelings be, and so will your mind be. Gurdjieff is not a book club. It's not something that happens sitting down. Anyway, wherever you are, I wish you well. Goodbye.